is something deeply powerful about the way we choose to believe. It's invisible, but it determines almost everything we do. You see it every day in how someone walks into a room, how they shake your hand, how they speak about a challenge they're facing. Belief isn't about having evidence. It's about carrying a posture, an attitude that says, I'm going to act as if things are going to work out even when there's no proof yet. And that belief, that mindset, shapes behavior more than circumstances ever could. Think about this. Two people are faced with the same challenge. One believes they'll fail, the other believes they'll figure it out. Same problem, two completely different responses. The first hesitates, they second guess, they avoid. The other leans in, they ask questions, they try things, they adapt. It's not that the second person is smarter or more talented, it's that they've already made a decision in their mind. This will work out, I just need to keep moving. And that belief changes how they behave. It fuels persistence, it fuels clarity, it fuels progress. We're often told to be realistic, as if realism is the same thing as resignation. But when people say be realistic, what they usually mean is don't expect too much. But I think that's a trap, because the moment we lower our expectations to match our fears, our actions follow. When you believe something isn't possible, you stop trying, you stop exploring, you stop innovating. Not because the door is locked, but because you stop turning the handle. Belief isn't naive, it's strategic. It's the foundation of initiative. The best performers in the world, athletes, artists, leaders, they all operate from a deep internal belief that they're capable of rising to the moment. They don't wait for confidence to show up. They act first. Confidence follows action. It's built, not born. And belief is what allows you to take that first step, to act without the guarantee. I met someone recently who was navigating a difficult career transition. He had lost his job, had no clear path forward, and felt completely stuck. But then something shifted. Not externally. He didn't suddenly get a job offer or win the lottery. What changed was how he chose to approach the uncertainty. He told me, I'm going to treat this like the best thing that ever happened to me, even though it doesn't feel like that yet. That one sentence changed everything. He started networking differently. He showed up to interviews with more energy. He created opportunities instead of waiting for them to appear. 3 months later, he was in a role that wasn't just better. It was a perfect fit. But it didn't happen because of luck. It happened because of belief. When you act as if everything always works out for you, you start making decisions based on possibility, not fear. That doesn't mean you'll never feel afraid. It means you don't let fear dictate your choices. You learn to trust the process, to trust your resilience. You don't need to see the full path to start walking. You just need to believe the next step will lead somewhere worth going. There's a quiet power in people who move forward without certainty. They walk differently, not arrogantly, but with a kind of quiet resolve. It's magnetic. Others are drawn to them, not because they have all the answers, but because they seem anchored. They're not reacting to every storm. They've made peace with the unknown. They've decided in advance that things will work out. So they carry that decision with them into every room, every meeting, every set. And here's what's interesting. When you behave as if everything always works out, it often does. Not because the universe bends to your will, but because your belief leads you to behave in ways that create better outcomes. You show up. You stay longer. You keep the conversation going. You listen more deeply. You experiment more often. People like working with people like that. Doors open more easily for people who knock more often. It's not magic. It's behavior rooted in belief. We all carry stories in our minds. Narratives about who we are, what we're capable of, what we deserve. Some of those stories were written by other people, by teachers who doubted us, by bosses who overlooked us, by parents who projected their own fears onto us. But here's the truth. You get to rewrite the story. You get to decide what belief you carry into the world, and that belief will shape how you move and how the world moves in response. Acting as if everything always works out for you isn't about arrogance or delusion. It's about grounded optimism. It's about saying, no matter what happens, I'll find a way through this. I'll learn, I'll grow, I'll become stronger. And that's not pretending, that's preparing. That's choosing to believe in your capacity to rise even when the ground feels shaky. The people who inspire us most are never the ones who had it easy. They're the ones who kept going when things didn't make sense. The ones who chose belief in the face of uncertainty. They acted as if, not because they knew they'd succeed, but because they knew who they were wouldn't quit. That's what we remember. That's what moves us. So next time you face something uncertain, something unclear, remember, the most important decision isn't what you do, it's what you believe. Because belief shapes behavior and behavior shapes outcomes. Choose wisely. Choose to act as if it's all working in your favor, because the moment you do, you've already changed the game. We are storytellers, all of us. Whether we realize it or not, every day we're telling ourselves a story about who we are, what's possible, and how the world works. And the thing is, our brains believe it, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. Because we've said it enough times. This isn't just poetic, it's biological. Our brains are wired for narrative. They're constantly trying to make sense of the world, to create coherence. When something happens, good or bad, the brain asks, what does this mean? And depending on the story we're already telling ourselves, we'll give it a very different answer. Two people can experience the exact same situation. One says, see, nothing ever works out for me. The other says, this is just a detour, something better is coming. One person spirals, the other adjusts. Same reality, different interpretation. The difference isn't the situation, it's the story. And what's most important to understand is this: the story comes first. Behavior follows. The way we think influences the way we act, and the way we act influences the results we get. It's a cycle, and it starts with the words we repeat in our own minds. The brain doesn't question whether the story is useful. It just accepts it. So if the story we're telling ourselves is that we're unlucky, unworthy, or doomed to fail, the brain will start scanning the world for proof. It will find ways to validate that belief. It's not lying to us, it's just trying to help us make sense of the world through the filter we gave it. But the good news is we can change the filter, we can tell a new story. We can choose to act as if everything always works out for us, not because we have the evidence, but because we want to give our brain a better target, a new lens, a more useful truth. Now, I'm not talking about blind positivity or ignoring real problems. I'm talking about perspective, and I'm talking about choosing a story that empowers us to move, to try, to lead, to show up, even when the path is unclear. When we choose a better story, our brain starts to look for better answers. It gets curious instead of defensive, creative instead of defeated. I once worked with someone who had faced failure after failure in his startup journey. He was exhausted, burnt out. At one point he said, maybe I'm just not cut out for this. And I stopped him. I asked, what if the story you're telling isn't true? What if every setback is just preparing you for something better? And you just haven't seen it yet. He paused. That one question reframed everything. He didn't suddenly succeed overnight, but he began to show up differently. He asked better questions. He saw every challenge as part of the process, not a signal to quit. 6 months later, his third attempt caught traction. Not because he got smarter, but because he started telling a different story. One where failure wasn't final, one where everything was working for him, not against him. The brain believes the voice it hears most often, and that voice is usually our own. The way we talk to ourselves becomes the soundtrack of our lives. So when we choose to act as if things always work out, we're not pretending, we're programming. We're giving our minds a framework to respond with strength, not fear. This shift changes how we walk into meetings, how we deal with criticism, how we face rejection. If we tell ourselves that every rejection is redirection, then we no longer fear it, we embrace it. If we believe that every obstacle is an invitation to grow, we stop avoiding challenges and start seeking them out. The story gives the brain a job. Find the good, find the lesson, find the way forward. And because the brain wants to help, it starts delivering on that request. I think we often underestimate how much power we actually have over our own mindset. We wait for external validation to believe good things are coming, but the truth is belief doesn't follow evidence, it creates it. When we believe that everything always works out, we act in ways that align with that story. We become more open, we build trust, we persevere longer, and those behaviors over time lead to outcomes that look a lot like things working out. Think about the leaders who've made the biggest impact in your life. Chances are they weren't the smartest or the most talented people in the room. But they had a way of making you believe, not in hype, not in fluff, but in possibility. They helped you see a version of the story where you mattered, where your contribution had meaning, where progress was possible. That's what great leaders do. They tell a better story, and they tell it so consistently that people begin to live into it. We can do that for ourselves too. We can become our own leader, not in some cliche self-help way, but in a grounded, practical way. When you wake up in the morning, you can choose what narrative you feed your mind. Is today a threat, or is it an opportunity? Is the challenge ahead a roadblock or a stepping stone? Are you unlucky, or are you in the middle of a great story that hasn't reached its turning point yet? The brain will follow your lead. It will believe what you repeat. So choose wisely. Speak to yourself the way you would to someone you care deeply about. Tell the story of resilience, of momentum, of trust. Act as if the best is yet to come. And not only will your mindset shift, but so will your actions, your energy, your results. Because in the end, the story we tell ourselves isn't just a reflection of who we are. It's a blueprint for who we're becoming. Tell a story worth believing and then live it. There's a common misunderstanding about optimism. People hear the word and immediately think of naivete, like optimism means ignoring reality or pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. But that's not optimism, that's denial. Real optimism is not about avoiding the hard things, it's about choosing how we face them. It's not wishful thinking, it's disciplined thinking. It's a choice to see what's possible, even when what's in front of you feels impossible. Discipline is the key word. Optimism is a practice, a mindset we commit to. And like anything worth doing, it takes effort, it takes intention, it takes work. Because the truth is, pessimism is easy. Cynicism is easy. Doubt comes naturally. The world constantly gives us reasons to believe things are falling apart, that we're running out of time, out of chances, out of hope. But optimism, that's something you have to choose, and you have to keep choosing it, especially when it's hardest. You can't just wait to feel optimistic. That's like waiting to feel strong before you go to the gym. It doesn't work that way. You build strength by showing up. You build optimism the same way, by training your mind to search for hope, to search for solutions, to stay grounded in the belief that there's always another step forward, even if it's small. Even if it's messy, even if it doesn't look like progress yet. I've met leaders who carry this kind of optimism like armor. They walk into tough situations, not with arrogance or false cheer, but with a calm presence that says, we'll figure this out, we've got this. That kind of leadership creates stability. People gravitate toward it, not because the leader has all the answers, but because they bring a sense of direction, of belief. That's the power of disciplined optimism. It gives people something to hold on to. It starts with a simple but powerful question. What's the most generous interpretation of this moment? What's the most hopeful version of what's happening? When everything feels like it's falling apart, ask yourself, what could this be teaching me? What might this be preparing me for? It's not about pretending things are easy. It's about finding meaning in the hard. That's the heart of optimism. It's choosing purpose over panic. People who act as if everything always works out for them are not blind to difficulty. They've just trained themselves to hold two truths at once, that things are hard and that things are still moving forward, that setbacks sting and that they still carry value, that they may not be where they want to be yet and that they're still on the right path. That duality takes discipline. It takes emotional maturity and it takes daily practice. Think about the difference between someone who sees a failure as the end versus someone who sees it as feedback. The second person isn't immune to disappointment. They just choose to use it. They say, this didn't go the way I wanted, but what does it make possible now? Now, mindset doesn't happen automatically. It's built And the more you use it, the stronger it gets. We live in a culture that celebrates results, but real growth happens in the middle, in the unknown, in the waiting, in the not yet. And it's in those moments that optimism becomes either a lifeline or a liability. The kind that says, I'll only believe when I see proof, will collapse under pressure. But the kind that says, I'll keep showing up even when it's unclear, that's the kind that lasts. That's the kind that leads. Some people think optimism is soft, but I believe it's one of the toughest stances you can take. It's refusing to let your spirit be shaped by fear. It's standing in uncertainty and saying, I don't know how, but I know we'll make it through. That's not weak, that's courageous. And here's the truth, optimism doesn't guarantee that everything will work out exactly the way you want, but it guarantees that you'll be ready when it does. It puts you in motion, it keeps you open, it keeps you resourceful, it gives you a reason to keep trying when others have stopped. It keeps you in the game. I once heard someone say, hope is not a strategy. I disagree. Hope is where strategy begins. Hope gives birth to action. Without hope, there's no reason to plan, to solve, to try. Optimism lights the fuse. It says this is worth pursuing. And when we act from that place, we do better work. We collaborate better. We think more creatively. We bounce back faster. We become more resilient. Not because we're avoiding the pain, but because we're refusing to be defined by it. When you act as if everything always works out for you, what you're really doing is choosing disciplined optimism. You're saying, I know things won't be perfect, but I trust myself to learn. I trust myself to learn. I trust that the future holds more than what I can see today. And that mindset changes everything. Not instantly, but steadily. It doesn't mean you won't have moments of doubt. Of course you will. We all do. But optimism isn't the absence of doubt. It's what you return to after doubt. It's the home base, the anchor, the mindset you recalibrate to when the winds of uncertainty blow hard. And when you hold that space for yourself, for your team, for your future, you become the kind of person others want to follow. Not because you paint a perfect picture, but because you offer a believable future. A future built on effort, on values, on resilience, on trust. So when you're tempted to give in to discouragement, remember this. Optimism is not about ignoring the dark. It's about choosing to light a candle anyway. It's the quiet, consistent discipline of saying, we are not done yet. There's still something here. There's still something worth building. That discipline, that posture, that mindset, it's what turns ordinary people into extraordinary leaders, not because they never fall, but because they never stop believing in the rise. There's a moment before every decision where we hesitate. We wait for clarity, we wait for signs, we wait until we feel ready. But here's the truth. Clarity rarely comes before action. Confidence doesn't either. We like to think we need evidence before we move, but in reality, we often need to move before we find the evidence. The path reveals itself through motion. Action creates evidence. We all want certainty. It's human. We want to know how things will play out before we invest our energy, our time, our heart. But in most of life, certainty isn't a starting point. It's an outcome. And it only shows up after we've already taken steps into the unknown. There's this idea that belief is something we must have before we act, that we must believe in ourselves completely before we try something new, before we speak up, before we lead. But that's backwards. Belief grows from action. Each step forward, no matter how small, gives us something real to stand on, something to learn from, something that says, you're doing it, keep going. The people we admire, the ones who seem brave or bold or confident, they didn't wait until they felt certain. They moved anyway. They acted without a guarantee. And because they moved, they discovered something about themselves, about the world, about what was possible. When you act as if everything always works out for you, you begin to create that evidence in real time. It's not fake confidence. It's a choice to behave in alignment with the outcome you want before you have the proof. And when you do that, when you show up with energy, optimism, resourcefulness, the world starts to meet you with opportunities that wouldn't have shown up if you'd stayed still. Imagine standing at the edge of a foggy path. You can't see more than 5 feet ahead. You could wait for the fog to lift. But what if it doesn't? Or what if the fog only lifts as you walk? Every step forward reveals more. And that's how life works. That's how progress works. The movement is what makes the future visible. I've worked with people who spent years waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for the fear to go away, waiting for a green light from someone else. And what they realized, often painfully, is that waiting doesn't produce new data. It just strengthens doubt. The longer you wait, the louder your fears become. But when you act, even in a small way, you give your brain something new to work with. You interrupt the fear loop. Action disrupts the narrative of helplessness. It breaks inertia. It sends a message to yourself, I'm not stuck, I'm not powerless, I'm in motion. And that shift from passivity to agency, that's where everything begins to change. One of the most liberating truths is this. You don't have to feel ready to begin. Readiness is not a prerequisite, it's a byproduct. It grows with each action. You speak up in the meeting and suddenly you feel a little braver. You send the proposal, you realize you survived. You try, you fail, you learn, you adjust. And each cycle of doing builds your internal library of evidence. I can handle this, I'm stronger than I thought. Let me tell you about a woman I once coached. She wanted to start her own business. She had the idea, the passion, the vision, but she kept stalling. She said, I just need to be sure this will work. But what she really needed was movement. So I asked her to start small. Make one call, send one email, pitch one person. And what happened? She heard no a few times. But she also got a yes, and that one yes gave her more evidence than any amount of sitting still ever could. This is how momentum is built, through motion. Not giant leaps, just consistent, intentional steps in the direction of your vision. Each one adds weight to the belief that what you want is possible. Each one invites the world to respond. And often, the world does respond. Not always how we expect, but in ways that remind us we're not crazy for trying. But we have to stop treating action like a reward for confidence. Action is the engine. Confidence is what shows up after you've been in the seat for a while. And when you act from the belief that things are working out for you, you don't need immediate results to feel validated. You're not chasing proof, you're creating it. There's also something contagious about this mindset. When you operate from the assumption that things are unfolding in your favor, even when they don't look like it yet, you bring a different energy into the room. People feel it, they trust it, and often they join you. You start building a team, a movement, a culture around that energy. And all of it starts because you decided to move before the map was clear. Now, this doesn't mean you act recklessly. Disciplined action still includes reflection, strategy, patience, but it's forward motions. It says, I may not have all the answers, but I'll get better ones by engaging. You can't steer a parked car, but once you start rolling, you can course correct, you can adjust based on what the road gives you. When you look back at your own life, chances are the moments you're most proud of didn't begin with certainty. They began with risk, with a step into something new. And what gave those moments meaning wasn't the outcome, it was that you chose to act. That's what built your story. That's what gave you real data about who you are and what you're capable of. So if you're standing at the edge of something right now, an idea, a change, a challenge, and you're waiting to feel ready, remember this. Action creates evidence. And the evidence you're looking for won't come before you move. It's waiting on the other side of movement. When you act as if everything always works out for you, you're not gambling. You're practicing faith in your future. You're choosing courage over certainty. And that choice builds the foundation for the life you want, one step, one call, one decision at a time. So move, not because you're fearless. Move because you're becoming the kind of person who no longer waits for permission to begin. We don't always realize it, but every time we show up, every time we push through resistance, every time we move forward despite the unknown, we're not just doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for the people watching, the people looking for proof that it's possible, because one of the most powerful forms of leadership is simply being the evidence someone else needs to believe. You become the proof that the journey is worth it. In every room, in every company, in every family, there are people quietly watching, wondering, hoping, can someone like me do this? Can I speak up and still be respected? Can I fail and still be worthy? Can I take a risk and survive it? And when they see someone else do it, someone who doesn't have all the answers, someone who's still figuring it out, it gives them something more powerful than advice. It gives them permission. That's what happens when you act as if everything always works out for you. You embody a mindset of possibility. You carry the weight of belief in a way that lifts others, not through grand speeches or empty motivation, but through your presence, your resilience, your consistency. You become a mirror that reflects potential back to people who have temporarily lost sight of their own. Think about it. When we're struggling, when we're unsure, we look for models. We scan the environment for people who've gone ahead, people who navigated uncertainty and made it to the other side. That's why stories matter. That's why leadership matters. It's not just about authority or status. It's about demonstration. When someone takes the first leap, it lowers the psychological cost for everyone else. But here's the catch. You can't inspire belief in others if you're constantly waiting for external proof yourself. True leadership begins with the decision to become your own evidence, to act in alignment with what you believe before you have all the results, to hold space for possibility even when the outcome is unclear. When you do that, you create an atmosphere of trust. And trust is the soil where growth begins. I once worked with a leader who inherited a broken team. Morale was low, results were inconsistent. No one really believed things could improve. The leader didn't walk in with a flashy strategy or a dramatic overhaul. Instead, she just started showing up. Calm, steady, present. She listened, she acted, she followed through, and over time, her behavior created a new story. One that said, we're not stuck, we're just getting started. People began to believe again, not because of a slogan, but because of her example. This is what it means to lead with evidence. You become the person who brings courage into the room simply by how you carry yourself. Not with perfection, not with certainty, but with conviction, with humility, with a willingness to go first. And in doing so, you help others find their voice. Now, some people hear this and think that's too much pressure. I didn't sign up to be someone's role model. But whether you signed up or not, people are watching. Especially the ones closest to you, your friends, your children, your coworkers. They're not looking for you to be flawless. They're looking for you to be real, to try, to fail and get back up, to navigate life with a sense of purpose that says, I may not control everything, but I control how I respond. And your response, that's what they remember, not the result, not the accolades, but the way you showed up. That becomes the blueprint they borrow from when it's their turn to take a risk. What's beautiful about this is that it's not about having a title. You don't have to be the CEO to lead this way. You don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. You just have to be consistent in your values, rooted in your belief, willing to be seen trying. That alone changes the temperature of every room you walk into. And here's something else. When you live like you are the evidence that everything always works out, you develop a kind of quiet authority. People lean in, they ask questions, they trust you, not because you have all the answers, but because you've clearly wrestled with the question. Because you're not pretending, you're practicing. And that practice is magnetic. We don't talk enough about the weight of unseen leadership. The kind that doesn't get applause. The kind that happens in the conversations no one hears. The late nights, the doubts, the private moments where you choose to believe again. That's the kind of leadership that shapes culture. That's the kind that builds trust that lasts. Because eventually, someone will come to you, maybe years later, and say, I watched you. I saw how you handled that moment, and it gave me the courage to do the same. And you'll realize that your discipline, your mindset, your resilience, it didn't just serve you, it lit the way for someone else. So ask yourself, what kind of evidence am I becoming? What story does my life tell? What permission do I give others by the way I live, work, lead, and show up? Because the truth is, whether you realize it or not, You are becoming someone's reason to believe. You are shaping what others think is possible. And when you choose to live from the assumption that things are working in your favor, even